Okay, Harold, start this conversation and start off by telling us that title again and what this section is.
Not only is the fossil column false, but hominids are a hoax.
Is there anything to believe in? Everything seems to be a hoax, seems to be false. Are we going to have any positive stuff on the show?
Do you want me to try and defend evolution when I don't believe in it, Brad? Yeah, you could invent all kinds of stuff. And that's exactly what Dr. Patterson was talking about. He says, look, if I were to get artists to draw pictures, and that has been done, and this relates to hominids being a hoax, you know, because, for instance, I think last time I mentioned that in the monkey trial in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925, when Scopes, the teacher, was accused of teaching evolution in the classroom in Dayton, Tennessee, which actually was a lie. He probably didn't do that at all. But anyway, the Civil Liberties Association got him to agree that he would stand trial for this because they wanted to make an issue out of the creation evolution thing in the classroom. And when he was tried, one of the greatest evidences that Clarence Darrow, the atheist lawyer, brilliant lawyer, brought against William Jennings Bryan, the Bible-believing chap who almost became president of the United States 3 times, was a tooth, the evidence of a tooth. It was Nebraska man, they called. This tooth came from a hominid, half monkey, half man, from a pithecanthropos. Pithekos in Greek is a monkey or an ape, and anthropos, anthropology, is a man. So the Clarence Darrow brought out this tooth, and the scientist said this tooth belonged to a hominid, a half monkey, half man, an ape man, and that had great weight. He was very persuasive in persuading the radio audience that listened all over the world to this trial that here was evidence of a half man, half ape. Transitional form between ape and man. And of course, obviously Dr. Patterson doesn't agree with this because he says he hasn't got one watertight example of a transitional form. But this was a transitional form. Well, years later, they found that this tooth comes from an animal, a pig-like animal, a peccary, that is still extant, still living down in the Amazon Valley and other places in the world. So it was a hoax. It was a hoax. But you know, Dr. Patterson says, look, I could probably get artists to draw pictures. And this is what they did for this Nebraska man. They found this tooth in Nebraska, and so called Nebraska man. And they got artists to draw up what this man looked like. If you can imagine trying to draw up what a man looks like from or a half man, a hominid. From a tooth, eh? But they drew up this Nebraska man, and then they drew up a nice wife for him, and they drew up a prehistoric jungle scene for them to live in. And you know, same thing we see in the Royal Ontario Museum, which is paid for by our money. All these trees that Dr. Patterson talked about with the ancestral forms of horses, a lot of baloney, the whole thing, fabricated. And so, yeah, the hominids are hoax. Everywhere you look at the evidence for ape man, for monkeys or apes developing into men, where there's supposed to be transitional forms between monkeys or apes and man, you've got a hoax. We mentioned last time the Piltdown man. When I was at university, that was exploded. I think it was basically developed about in the early 1930s and exploded when I was at university in the 1950s, where some students of Professor Dawson in the Piltdown area of England got this skull, and they treated it with acid, and they filed the teeth and that kind of thing and made it look like so it had come from an ape, and so it was a hominid or pithecanthropos. And for about 20 years it was held to be evidence that apes had turned into man. And then you've got other examples where you've got, I mentioned last time, the Java man, Dr. Eugene Dubois. He was hired by the Dutch government, even though he was French, his name Dubois shows you that, and he was hired by the Dutch government to research in the area of Java, and he came up with some bones, femur, I think, from some creature, and some parts of skull, and of course teeth again. They love teeth. And he took these bones and he made plaster casts of them and sent them all over the world to prove that this was a half monkey, half man. That was in 1893. He was running out of money for his research, and suddenly he found this, of course, and then the money started to flow in, because here was fantastic evidence of monkeys turning into men, a real hominid, a real Pithecanthropus, and so from 1893 to about 1932 or 3, when he was on his deathbed, he admitted that what people had questioned, both creationists and evolutionists had questioned, that these bones and pieces of skull and so on didn't come from the same creature, he admitted. One came from a gibbon, a kind of monkey, and others came from men. They used to kill monkeys and eat their brains in this, by thousands of pits of them there in that area apparently. So you can fill in the bones with plaster Paris, and you can draw paintings of them, and you can create backgrounds for them, prehistoric backgrounds, and make it all look so wonderful. But it's a hoax. Hominids are a hoax. So, and of course you can understand why they concentrate on this type of transitional form, because that's a key one. What was the species that transmuted, evolved from one species to another to become man? If man is not a special creation of God, into which God breathed the breath of life, and man became a living soul, created in the image and likeness of God, then of course you can have anything. Man he's just an accident. He's just a chance.
So all these teachings that I've taught, even when I went to school, are all a hoax about evolution and man coming from the sea, evolving into an ape, evolving into prehistoric man, evolving into what we have today. It's all a hoax.
Yeah. It's a wonderful hypothesis. I mean, it's a tremendous intellectual exercise in theory. But interesting, we should mention some of our creationist people in Britain, when I was involved with creation science in Ontario years ago, they were on a radio broadcast with Professor Dawkins, the man who has challenged Christianity and written the book, famous book, The God Delusion. It's a delusion to believe in God, and supported evolution. It's the answer. And on that radio broadcast, believe it was on BBC, they asked Professor Dawkins, they said, Professor Dawkins, just how does this evolutionary process work? And he said, well, really, it's just the way Darwin said. It's through a process of natural selection and through favorable mutations. And of course, what he meant by that was favorable mutations within a species that gradually caused it to transmute, from a mutation to a transmutation, from one species to another, a snake to a bird or whatever you got. And so they said, oh, that's very interesting, Professor Dawkins. Could you give us an example of a favorable mutation? Do you know he couldn't give them one? Couldn't give them one. Now I know that there are favorable mutations within species. For instance, you have examples of beetles that their lives are preserved and their species preserved on islands because they lose their wings and then they're not blown off the island and that kind of thing. And you get different kinds of eyes, and you've got the beaks that Darwin discovered different kinds of beaks adapted to their environment and food sources and so on.
Chameleons.
The Galapagos Islands, yes, and that kind of thing. But, and another amazing thing, Professor Dawkins was...
So you're talking about like evolution within a species,
Yes.
You find examples of that.
That's
Not-
mutation.
But not between a species.
No, from one species to another. Not transmutation from one species to another, but there's all kinds of adaptation within
Within a
species.
species.
Yeah, say, we see dogs that are almost the size of mice and see them almost the size of horses and very different features. But they're still dogs. Because the Bible says, and I think this is the point we made last time when we were finishing up, the Bible says that God made every creature according to its kind, according to its min, M-I-N basically, in Genesis. We read that, and you can't cross those barriers, and there's no evidence that they've ever been crossed. Lots of imagination, but no evidence. The other rather interesting interview with Dawkins, Ben Stein was asked.
Who asked him?
Pardon?
Ben Stein asked
Ben Stein asked Professor Dawkins, thank you, Ray. Yeah, and it's in that movie that's on the shelf here, Expelled. No Intelligence Allowed is the subtitle of it. Expelled, where Stein gets expelled from the scientific community, and as professors do, if they say they believe in intelligent design. You just mentioned intelligent design, and boy, you're out of the university like lightning. Or if you're in the scientific community, they don't want to have anything to do with you. We don't want the idea of intelligent design. So Ben Stein pressed Dawkins in this interview, as recorded in the movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. He said, Professor Dawkins, just how would such an extremely complex thing as a living cell come into existence, according to your idea, your view? And Dawkins hedged and hummed and hawed and hummed and hedged. And finally, as Stein pressed him, he said, well, perhaps some more advanced type of life on a distant planet could have created a living cell. Well, that's intelligent design. It's just taking it back one step, you see, from our present solar system or whatever. But it's still intelligent design. And that's what they're firing professors and scientists for. You can't have an intelligent creator that actually created these things.
there was a real stir among the atheist community, and they were saying that he got tricked into saying that he said something he didn't mean, and he was trying to recant what he'd said because of the pressure of the interview.
He didn't say what intelligent design from what planet. He said other planet, but what planet? And
but how does that help us? Then that means how did that intelligence evolve on that planet before?
Exactly.
There still is a designer somewhere that's creating this intelligence that, in turn,
This is just
an endless
ET all over again, extraterrestrial.
Exactly.
You see.
Exactly.
But the interesting thing is that this is an old, drummed up evolutionary theory from way back, and from everywhere. It's called panspermia. That is that there's life all through the universe, and of course they've got these telescopic radar things set up to try and find out if there's intelligence, or any response of intelligence from outer space. But the panspermia evolutionary theory is that life on Earth came because there's life. It's all over the universe, and some of the seeds of it came to Earth somehow. Well, that's really what Dawkins is saying there. It came from outer space. But it's still an intelligent creature, if that's true. If his idea was true, it's intelligent design, and that's what they're firing professors and scientists for all over the world. So it's wild. So that's sort of hominids or hoax. Now the last one that we want to deal with, do we want to deal with it now? Or?
Let's take another break.
Okay.
And let's come back to talk about the third one and tell us what that is from.
The third one is radiometrics are riddled.
I can say that. Radiometrics are riddled.
You got that.
See, I walked your lips
That
that time.
sounds really professional.
Now, we won't have this available this time, but we have a booklet called Evolution Science Falsely So Called. We had a hard drive mishap, so we're not going to this week have that book available for download. But keep watching the website, come back to these videos, and at some point we're going to also include a link for that book as a free download once we recover that file.
I'd like to say one more thing. Your questions and comments are always welcome on truthiswhatmatters.com, and just fill out the box on the bottom of the website for a reply.
Yeah, for a comment.
For a comment, and we'll get them on the next edition of truthiswhatmatters.com.
Yes, we'd like to get to know our viewers, and at some point we'd like to open up a BBS area where we can all get together and discuss things, and possibly later start up a call-in opportunity on the show.
Last time I mentioned that in the monkey trial in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925, when Scopes, the teacher, was accused of teaching evolution in the classroom in Dayton, Tennessee, which actually was a lie. He probably didn't do that at all. But anyway, the Civil Liberties Association got him to agree that he would stand trial for this because they wanted to make an issue out of the creation evolution thing in the classroom. And when he was tried, one of the greatest evidences that Clarence Darrow...
Okay, Harold, start this conversation and start off by telling us that title again and what this section is.
Not only is the fossil column false, but hominids are a hoax.
Is there anything to believe in? Everything seems to be a hoax, seems to be false. Are we going to have any positive stuff on the show?
Do you want me to try and defend evolution when I don't believe it? The atheist lawyer, brilliant lawyer, brought against William Jennings Bryan, the Bible-believing chap who almost became President of the United States 3 times, was a tooth, the evidence of a tooth. It was Nebraska man, they called. This tooth came from a hominid, half of it, Brad. Yeah, could invent all kinds of stuff. And that's exactly what Dr. Patterson was talking about. He says, look, if I were to get artists to draw pictures, and that has been done, and this relates to hominids being a hoax, you know, because, for instance, I think